Thank you so much, Robert and Sumi. It was beautiful. And Terry, where do you go? Thank you for that lovely story for the children and young at heart. I have to say that this is a really perfect match for what I want to share with you. In 1860, on September 14, it finally happened. In 1860, September 14, the world-famous tightrope walker by the name of Charles Blondin finally was ready to do something that nobody had ever done before. He had a rope stretched across Niagara Falls, and he was going to accomplish this incredible task, to walk across the Niagara Falls on the tightrope. And on both sides, there was a huge crowd gathered to watch this impossible task to be accomplished. And when the time came and Charles arrived at the place, he turned to the crowd and he asked them a question. Do you have faith that I can do this? And what do you think the crowd said? Everybody said, yes, of course you can do it. We've seen you do these things so many times. Of course you can do it. And what happened? Charles, just one step at a time, one dangerous step at a time, he walked across Niagara Falls. It's what is almost a quarter mile. And everybody was cheering and applauding and were so happy. So on the other side, where there was another crowd gathered, he turned to the crowd and said, do you have faith? Do you believe that I can carry a load over this rope and over the falls? And what do you think they said? Of course, we believe that you can do that. And he did. He took a big bag of something and carried it over. Now, when he got back to the U.S. side, he turned to the crowd again and he says, do you believe that I can push a wheelbarrow across these falls? And says, of course, yes. We believe that you can do it. And what do you think happened? He did it. Now he was on the Canadian side and he says, ask the crowd, do you believe that I can not only push the wheelbarrow over, but I can have a person sitting in the wheelbarrow and I can push it over the falls? And what do you think they said? Of course we believe it. You can do it. And then he said, who wants to sit in the wheelbarrow? And you know what happened? A strange silence fell over the crowd. You see, it is very easy to believe and have faith in theory. But when your life is on the line, it's a totally different story. What is faith? Where does it come from? And that's the topic of our conversation today. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you so much for Jesus Christ. And we ask that you would talk to us these moments, that your Spirit would touch our hearts and somehow ignite this mysterious thing called faith, that we would see you for who you are and believe you for real. In Jesus' name, amen. And this conversation about faith will be as part of the series of the disciples, the unlikely 12. So, which of the disciples you think we are going to talk about today? Said yes, what? Thomas. Would you agree? Because what is the Thomas best known with? Doubting Thomas. It's proverbial, right? Doubting Thomas. I want to challenge that stereotype somewhat along the course of this conversation, this sermon. But first, I want to look into the Bible. What is faith? I mean, we use that term a lot. We talk about faith. We talk that we need to believe. We talk about believing in God. We talk about believing in certain doctrines. What is faith? And of course, the best definition is found in Hebrews 11, right? Hebrews 11:1, where the writer says, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen." That's New American Standard Bible translation. And then NIV translates it a little bit differently. Faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. So there are two sides, two pairs of words that talk about faith. On the one side, we are sure about what? That we hope for. How do they go together? Sure and hope. When you say hope, is it something that you know, it's kind of set in cement, set in stone, or how do we approach hope? We kind of, what? We anticipate. We want it very much. And here he says, you are sure about that which you want very much. You anticipate. And you hope that God will do. And the other pair is uncertain. We are certain about what? The things that we do not see. It's even stranger. How can you be certain about things that you do not see? And that's the paradox of faith. If you see everything in your life, do you need faith? No. You see, you are sure because you see. You can touch, you can hear, you can taste. Faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. And remember, we need to always remember that faith in theory is one thing, and faith in real life is a totally different thing. So, let's look at Thomas. Again, Thomas is mentioned in all four lists of disciples, in the Synoptic Gospels and in Acts. And there is another mention of Thomas outside the lists, and that's in the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John gives us two glimpses into what kind of man Thomas was. Now, what does it mean, Thomas, the name? It's twin. The Greek version of Thomas's name, Didymus, means twin, and Thomas is the same word in Aramaic, the twin. So we don't know anything about his sister or brother. And infant mortality was very high in those days, as we can imagine. And twins usually or seldom survived. So we don't know anything about his brother or sister, but we just know that he was a twin. Let's look at the first instance where we meet Thomas in John 11. In John 11, we see Thomas in the context of believing and faith. And so is the other story about Thomas found in John. It's related to faith and believing. Both times when we meet Thomas in the Gospel of John, we see him in this context of believing. And for John, if you remember, we talked about it earlier, believing is the dominant theme because John wants us to believe. The purpose of his gospel is to help us believe. Remember in chapter 20, he has written sort of a purpose statement. And he says, Jesus did, in chapter 20, verse 30, Jesus did many other miraculous signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book, but these are written so that you may believe. So John was specifically selecting stories from the life of Jesus to help us, the readers, to believe. And therefore, we see Thomas in both instances in the context of believing. Chapter 11. What is the larger context of this story? This chapter 11 describes the death of Lazarus. Who was Lazarus? What was his relationship to Jesus? In verse 5, it says, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So these three siblings, Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. And Jesus was very close to them. Now, before we go to the story itself, this was a time when the Pharisees already had come to the point where they hated Jesus so much that they wanted to get rid of him. They considered him as a threat. And in chapter 11, after resurrection of Lazarus, we see that from verse 45 that the Pharisees had a meeting, and they decided in that meeting that they would rather kill Jesus than allow him to grow in his popularity and as they perceived, to lead the people astray. So that was the larger environment in which this story happened. Now, in verse 1, now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. And Mary and Martha sends word to Jesus that the one you love, your friend Lazarus, is sick. Now, what did Jesus do? And we will not go into too many details because our focus is on Thomas this time. But how did Jesus react to this sad news that Lazarus is sick and he was friend of Jesus and it said that Jesus loved them? He waited. He waits for 2 days. What a strange reaction, isn't it? Would that be helpful for the faith of Martha and Mary? If they called for Jesus to come and help, and then there is silence. Have you been in a situation like that? When you pray, and there is a silence. And it seems like God waits. And in verse 7, after the 2 days had passed, then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." Now the disciples are surprised because they thought it's too dangerous to go to Judea because of anger of Pharisees. They will stone him. They will crucify him. We can't do that. So they had interpreted Jesus' delay of going to Lazarus as that he's afraid and maybe strategically positioning him to protect his life and the life of his disciples. And so we read in verse 8, "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago the Jews tried to stone you, and yet you are going back there." And what sense does that make? It's dangerous. It's too dangerous for you to go. Now, it made sense that this is too dangerous. This is too dangerous. And Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? A man who walks by day will not stumble, for he sees by this world's light. It is when he walks by night that he stumbles, for he has no light." That's another theme in John, the light versus darkness. After he had said this, he went on to tell them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up." And his disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may," what? "Believe." Do you get it? The wait for 2 days was for what reason? To increase their faith, to give them an opportunity to grow their faith. Isn't that strange? But it's true. See, faith, in theory, means nothing. Faith in real life, when your own life is on the line, that's where we discover real faith. Faith in the face of death. And then we come to Thomas, our friend Thomas, in verse 16. Then Thomas, called Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." So here you have the doubting Thomas displaying an extraordinary faith. His observation or his conclusion may have been too grim because they were not going to die. But he thought that they were. Nevertheless, he had discovered faith that found parallel in no other disciple. He said, no matter what the consequences, let's go, because Jesus is with us. Even if we have to die, we'll trust in Him. Thomas is the faithful in this chapter. Faithful Thomas, not doubting Thomas. But, as all of us, our faith may not be very stable. And there is another story in John where Thomas is seen in a different light. In chapter 20. In chapter 20 of John, this is the day of resurrection. Jesus had been crucified on Friday. And this is the Sunday. And we meet Thomas, the doubting Thomas, the infamous doubting Thomas. The disciples have been devastated by the reality of the crucifixion of Jesus. They had lost their hope. They had lost their will to go on. And then some strange things started to happen on Sunday. There were things that couldn't be explained humanly. And Jesus appears to the disciples. Hey, Ryan. Jesus appears to the disciples. Let's read verses 19 and 20. On the evening of the first day of the week, when the disciples were together with the doors locked for fear of the Jews. Now, when you lock your doors behind you, you're fearful. And the disciples were very fearful because they were afraid. Now Jesus was dead. The Jews had gotten Jesus. Now they will come after them. So they locked their doors and probably in darkness were sitting together, huddling together, not knowing what to do. And all of a sudden, something happens. John simply says, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace. Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and side, his wounds. The disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. What a change from despair to joy. Jesus all of a sudden appeared through the locked door and gave them peace and showed his hands and his side, and they were overjoyed. But Thomas was not there. Thomas was not with the disciples. And then there is another instance when Jesus appears to the disciples, right? The same chapter, verse 24. Now Thomas, called Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord," this incredible news. But he said to them, "Unless I see," remember Hebrews 11, "unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I simply will not believe." You see the difference between the Thomas that we met in chapter 11 and now in chapter 20. And it's easy to get from one to the other. If we feel like we have this stellar faith, don't be surprised that you find yourself in chapter 20. Now, why did he doubt? Why? Didn't he know better? Hadn't Jesus told them that he will rise again? Why Thomas was so bad in this instance, while the other disciples were so good and had such a great faith, right? Actually, if you look closer, all of the disciples didn't believe at one time or another. For example, in Mark 16, we see the disciples in total unbelief. In Mark 16, in the narrative from 9 to 14, in verse 11, when they heard that Jesus was alive and that she had seen him, were they overjoyed? They did not believe it. And furthermore, in Luke 24, when the women came and told the disciples about the resurrected Jesus, in verse 11, but they did not believe the women because their words seemed to them like what? Nonsense. See, it turns out that Thomas is not the only one who didn't believe, who lacked faith. All of the disciples did. Only slowly they started to believe. They came to believe. They started to walk by faith. See, Paul speaks about it in 2 Corinthians 5, walking by sight or by faith. What is the difference? And again, it links us with the Hebrews definition of faith. What is the difference to walk in sight or in faith? Let's just look at the physical world. I mean, we usually, all of us, walk by sight, right? We see everything in front of us except those of us who may be blind. And I have a friend who is blind, and it's so hard. But we walk by sight. And let's say, what is the most familiar environment? Let's say our home, right? We know it very well, but still we walk by sight. Now, what happens at nighttime when the power goes out? And you have to enter your house. You can't walk by sight. Can you? It's dark. But you still walk, and you go and you navigate around the dinner table, and then you go around this closet, and you don't usually bump too many times in something because you walk by memory, right? You have memorized your house. You know it. And and there are some implications spiritually with this. How do you walk by faith? And that's where the children's story comes in. You see, by remembering what God has done in your life. Remember this boy, David, who had to face the giant Goliath. What did he say? He said, "Oh, piece of cake, I can do it." No, he said, "The Lord who had delivered me from the lion and the bear," he remembered how God had led him in the past. He remembered that God had been powerful in his life. And he said, I can walk by faith. Even though I don't see any way how I can win this warrior. Because he remembered he could walk by faith. And the text that Paul uses, this phrase, walking by sight or faith, the context in 2 Corinthians 5:7 is about just that, the two realities. The reality that we see around us in this world and God's reality that is unseen to our physical eyes, but that can be seen only through the eyes of faith. Now, what happened to Thomas? So, he refused to believe unless he had some empirical evidence about Jesus being alive. And it says, verse 26, a week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them, though the doors were locked. Jesus came and stood among them and said, the same words again, peace be with you. Now, how did he treat Thomas? I mean, if I were Jesus, if you were Jesus, in this instance, how would you treat Thomas? Wouldn't you say, I told you so, Thomas? Hey, come on, man. You should have more faith. Jesus didn't pick on him. He didn't ignore Thomas's doubts. He didn't condemn him for it either. He turned to Thomas right away and addressed his doubts. Verse 27. Then he said to Thomas, you want evidence? Here is the evidence. Put your fingers in my wounds. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe. And what is Thomas's reaction? This is the most amazing confession in the whole Gospel of John. The most extraordinary response. No one else called Jesus by that name. And Thomas says, verse 28, my Lord and my God. See, something happened between the time when Thomas was listening to the testimonies of the other disciples that Jesus was alive, and then he had this faith block that he couldn't believe unless he had evidence. And now, when he came in the very presence of Jesus, he discovered, or he rediscovered, amazing faith. That he could say what nobody in the gospel had said. He calls Jesus, my God. From the depth of doubt to a blazing faith, because he found himself in the presence of Jesus. It is one thing to believe in theory. It is totally different thing to have faith in real life, especially when your life is on the line. How is your faith today? How is your memory? How is your spiritual memory? It is very dangerous to have spiritual amnesia. That we so easily forget what God has done for us in the past. That we find ourselves in the shoes of the doubting Thomas. Have you seen God active in your life? And if you have you forgotten about it? How is your faith today? How real is it? You see, the real faith is not discovered in the comfort of your home when all is well and the husband are all doing well and the kids are exemplary and you have a good job and a fat check coming in every month. That's usually not where you discover a real faith. See, David didn't discover true faith when he was relaxing in his palace and got up in the evening to take a walk on the rooftop. David discovered true faith when he was facing the giant with just a few pebbles in his hands. And when everybody, his brothers and his mother and everybody in Saul's army told him that he's insane to try to go and face this giant. That's where David discovered real faith. True faith is always discovered in the time of trouble. When the blind man, living in total darkness, sensing the presence of God, sensing the presence of Jesus Christ the Lord, he stepped forward and asked him to be restored to sight. True faith is discovered when Gideon, with a ridiculously small band of 300 people, against the advice of all politicians and military advisors, went to battle with an army of an enemy of over 100,000. That's where he discovered a true faith. True faith was discovered when Abraham hoped against all hope. When it was humanly impossible to have a son, and he still believed because he knew his God. He could trust in him. He had tasted his goodness, just like that watermelon the children tasted. And he stubbornly insisted on believing in God. True faith is discovered when the prodigal was dragging himself home, realizing his own unworthiness, and still hoping and believing that the Father has love and acceptance for him. And the list goes on. You can find it in Hebrews 11. You can find it throughout the Bible. The question is, are you on the list? What is your faith like? And not only when things are well, both in your personal life, in your professional lives, or maybe in your church life. Have you discovered true faith in the presence of Jesus Christ? Because that's where it's found. We cannot generate faith by ourselves. We cannot just wish that we believed better. The only way we can find and discover faith is when we come in the presence of Jesus Christ. And we remember what He has done for us. And when we know Him in good times, we will surely find Him also in time of trouble. And I want to challenge you today to discover true faith for you personally, for your loved ones, and for your church here. To discover not faith in theory, but in real life, in the presence of Jesus. Amen.